Experts and individuals who understand the intensifying cycle of economic, societal, and government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
And it is up to us. Welcome, everybody, this evening. Weather craziness across the east coast of the U.S., at least southeast U.S. Thank you for joining us tonight. This broadcast will be partly us looking into the future cycles of how celestial cycles, solar activity, and electromagnetic activity affect our planet and the society on it, but at the same time going into a live storm broadcast here in East Tennessee. So we know that now upgraded just, is it a category 4 or 5? Everybody on the net's like, is it 4 or 5? It's a couple miles an hour difference. So they're trying to get everybody to upgrade it to a category 5. And I'm looking at the disaster microcosm of this. So people are cheering, yeah, it needs to be a category 5, and they're arguing over a couple miles an hour of velocity, like literally wind speed. I'm like, these people are going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble. 20-foot storm surge come in, landing in the panhandle right now as we speak right now, and then there's this whole debate. Yeah, it's 2 miles an hour, should be. Come on, get it the other 2 miles an hour. We need a category 5. Cheering on that it needs to be a larger storm. Like, what kind of, if you're going to manifest on this planet and you're manifesting a larger storm to make landfall, that's not what we want to be doing. We should in unison say this thing needs to shrink and absolutely evaporate in real time where less people are impacted by this. But those out there cheering, yeah, it's got to be bigger, go. It's kind of maniacal when you look at it. But as we go through these next 2 hours, the rainfall and the wind shall increase and really start to pound East Tennessee here. So windows are open. Ransom and I are on. I got 4 different weather feeds that I've been monitoring here. If anybody wants to follow along tonight with us, and also I'll give you some ham radio channels to follow. If you're going to look at, let's see, this is the nhcnoaa.gov. You're going to take a look at that. That's the National Hurricane Center, and you can just dive right in there and look at the rainfall potential. You can look at WBIR. Again, that's WBIR, Whiskey Bravo Indigo Romeo.com. That'll have a live radar feed where it'll show you, but there's no warnings on it. So if we jump over to weather.gov, MRX, that's MRX, Mike Romeo X-ray. That'll show you where the local radar and the Huntsville radar feeds are. You can ping on both of those. That's a little bit wider view than if you're looking at the radar weather.gov station on this one, Kilo Hilo Tango X-ray. And that'll be a little bit wider view coming in right through Chattanooga and where we are down into the east. Just had a nice thick band coming in, pushing onto the oranges and reds. But as this backside of the storm swings through here, as we're on the broadcast, this shall intensify, definitely. And if you want to go to the wide view, you can just go to weather.gov FCC. That'll bring you with the warnings, a lot of flash flood warnings in our area right now. No tornado or severe thunderstorm, just flash floods. Expecting anywhere from 4 to 12 inches, depending on where you're in the mountains right now. And I have reached out to those in the ham community in our area and asked them for live updates if something were to happen. And you're going to listen to this real time. I've pinged them, so it's instant notification on my feeds here. And Thomas, thank you for sending us this evening. Thursday, on the 20-meter band, looking at 14.325 megahertz on the USB, and they will activate 40-meter band, also on 7.268 megahertz LSB, and The 20-meter net will resume operation on 14, that's 14.325 megahertz, 7 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The 40-meter will resume operation, that is 7.268 megahertz at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Remember, there are people monitoring. If we have anything, dam breaks, road closures, floods, something unusual happen, I am trying to be open to receive information during this time for East Tennessee. So feel free to reach out. We're over here on Telegram right now, looking at some of the different frequencies that will be available for those listening in. So this was what we heard a few minutes ago, 12 p.m. today, or noon. That's 40 meter. Again, that's high frequency HF, 7.235. And we're looking at around 155. And this is where the grain splits to 157 before it's category 5. And everybody's cheering for that. And I'm just so baffled why you would cheer for a category 5 hurricane. You know, look into this thing. You can hear the rain really starting to increase right now. Now, the winds haven't picked up yet, but the wind chimes will start pinging here in a minute. And we're going to run with this for tonight. But thank you for joining us. Just needed to get the emergency broadcast out. If anybody is out there, I am going to keep an eye on the different warnings coming in for East Tennessee as we go through the evening. So Ransom may talk more tonight than I am. This is the largest storm in terms of width from one side of the storm to the other side of the storm as a record breaker. And also, if we're looking back in time, the amount of rain pushed up from a tropical system takes us back to 1858 here in East Tennessee, at least. So to preface the show tonight, and again, thank you for joining and thank you for your valuable time. Ransom Godwin and myself here on Civilization Cycle, taking you through the next couple of hours. And our world's really spinning in many different directions here. The record floods across the planet, decimating, and I mean absolutely gargantuan gouges out of our crop production globally, which is going to drive food prices further. You know, what kind of civil unrest might this turn on itself just because food prices get so high and people don't have money for the other necessities? And are we in a cycle is more the question. And if it is, what's it driven by? Is it driven by solar activity? Is it driven by the currents flowing into our star that give us that activity, or the cycles in our sun from further afield? And a spiral arm of the galaxy is interconnected, a web of electromagnetic filaments. So if there's a current downturn, like you're in a coffee shop and, you know, some of those filament bulbs, the old Edison bulbs, somebody on the wall can turn it down and it gets really very dim, or you can turn it up really high and it gets very bright. Well, if you think about electromagnetic currents flowing through the solar system or in the spiral arm of the galaxy or the galaxy itself, then those ebbs and flows of current, you know, perhaps they were demarcated by ancient civilizations. You know, the Mayans talk about being above the ecliptic and below the ecliptic. Perhaps that was their way to demarcate higher voltage input and lower voltage input. You know, the ice age cycles are driven by something also very similar. Higher voltage or lower voltage. Lower voltage means ice age. Higher voltage interglacial for that 10,000 years means more current into our star, more warm star, more active star. And then we come out of that. What magically takes us out of an ice age? We ain't driving SUVs. Maybe a lot of people were distilling back then, and the old worms were putting up so much heat into the atmosphere that it did offset the glaciation, and we came out of it because everybody was running on the creeks here. Anyway, Ransom, thanks for joining tonight. I'm just kind of babbling, man. I'm just kind of really energized right now with this extreme weather coming through.
I bet. I've watched a couple of them blow in, and it's kind of exciting. You got to get your Gore-Tex on. You know, this is one of those occasions, though, and we've talked about it before because this isn't the first storm that comes in. A lot of people say, why are you always talking about being prepared for everything? And well, this is why. This is the inevitable. So people all over the place seem to have a problem dealing with the concept of inevitability in the fact that there are natural disasters that don't care about your political affiliations. They don't care, how many followers you got on TikTok. It doesn't care. It just happens. And when it does, there's the people that are somewhat prepared, and sometimes even all the preparation you can do isn't enough because of circumstance. But then there's also the deer in headlight people, and they happen to be in the center of every natural disaster that ever happens. There's always those people, and there's a lot of charity, so sometimes they get taken care of, and sometimes they're sad stories. But this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be as sad as it often turns out to be, because we can, like, I mean, think about it. If you lived in the 1800s, you're not going to just get on and look at the weather map and say, oh, wow, that's 90-mile-an-hour plus winds coming directly at the city I live in with lots and lots of rain. Maybe, just maybe, I should plan on the lights going out, things being damaged, and lots of rainfall, flooding, etc. But for some reason, other than the sometimes local government does it okay, and sometimes they don't, because we've seen kind of exacerbated disasters when government was involved, i.e., Katrina. Right, that was one of the best examples. And then there's been other ones, kind of like Harvey, where the people of the actual country, not the government, stepped in and made it not such a disaster. And that's the way it has to be every time. You can't depend on local or federal law enforcement to show up and help you. Most of the time, they're after the fact reporters. In other words, they show up and they tell people what to do after the disaster. But rarely are they, making sure door to door that people have water, that they know what to do in case of a flood. Do they have enough food to last them that's non-perishable? Do they have backup light? Do they have adequate communication if there is no power? Things like that. That's not something that seems to be concentrated on by not only the populace, but the government, kind of insinuating to the populace that they should do it. They get little PSAs once in a while, and for the most part, I think most people ignore them at their own peril, actually. But this is an opportunity for everybody in the path of this storm to practice, and maybe even, like the government, it might become a drill that becomes reality where there actually is an emergency. But I guarantee you that you won't sweat it as hard or stress out or make mistakes as bad if you've already been thinking about it, preparing for it, and realizing that these kind of things are inevitable and they are going to happen, especially if you live in Florida or anywhere on the coastal, states there. They should, be above and beyond ready and prepared for things like this. But, a lot of people inland sometimes forget that these massive storms can cause a lot of damage and the possibility of death inland in the form of torrential rains and massive amounts of dumping of water on places that sometimes are already saturated. And then you have overflowing rivers, streams, roadways, bridges being compromised, things like that. And those are all the things that the government will come as a after the fact reporter to deal with. So none of that's going to help you out in the actual time of an emergency. So, we talk a lot about being prepared, yet over and over again, these things happen and a bunch of people end up dying or, get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe they decided to leave too late where it was, places that might have storm surge and things like that. So we might see some, sad stories coming, but I hope that we also see, because I was looking at a article that was talking about the massive amounts of linemen, and no, not the football players, but the guys that come and fix the electricity when it goes out. And there's like a mobile army, and they're already prepared to volunteer and even go places to start fixing right away. And so just like the what were they calling them? The Cajun Navy, which was basically a bunch of Americans that happened to have boats or whatever, and they were coming down to Texas to help out, help people move, or help people do whatever they needed to do. And if I recall right, the government was somewhat embarrassed about that, and even threatened to arrest some people that were obviously more helpful than they were. And there were some weird incidences because sometimes when you take the reins of your own salvation, or the people do, the government doesn't really like competition, so sometimes they don't want you to do anything. In the case of several major fires that are kind of notable and famous at this point, law enforcement and government actually tried to stop people from helping, or doing the things that they could do with their own preparedness, and they wanted to be in sole control of it. And unfortunately for those people, some in Hawaii and other places, listening to the government did not work out for them. So you have to have your own plan. You have to have your own idea of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. You need to know exactly what kind of logistics you actually have. Do you know the roads without a GPS? Things like that. Do you know where to go? Do you know the high spots around where you live in case of a flood? I mean, there's so many factors on really knowing where you're at, and your situational awareness that is the number one prep that you can have. Above having water and food and all of those other things, situational awareness is the number one prep you can have. So you need to know the terrain where you live, everything about it around you. And it's ironic you sent me that thing about Carazozo, because I kind of wanted to talk about that. It is one of the longest lava flows on Earth, and it just popped up one day about 5,000 years ago. And there were people that lived here, and not only that, they would have had the opportunity to like really freak out about how the Earth could change at a moment's notice, where all of a sudden there was a giant river of lava flowing next to the only source of food and water and sanctuary in a massive desert that was, super dry. So if you can imagine three rivers dumping into a river of fire, basically, and that's what they call it. It's the River of Fire, or Valley of Fires, there in Carazozo, which is a really cool place because right next to it are 1,000-year-old petroglyphs, and who knows how old some of them are. I postulate that there are actually several different waves of people over different times, judging by the colorization of some of them and the different artistic style, going back to what they call the archaic petroglyphs that don't make much sense to anyone. But there's obviously layers and layers. So this was like a weirdly holy place. And they put the signs of the times on the rocks there. So if you went there and you came out of the massive desert, the Chihuahuan Desert, or even the Sonoran Desert, and made your way over, you would have came across a bunch of standing stones with pictures of deer, ram, cougar, bear, crawfish, regular fish, pictures of snakes and stuff where they den. I mean, like the whole idea of the area is on the rocks there, and even like map type stones, celestial markers, compasses, everything. And so people would have sat on this valley, probably even when that lava flow happened, just in amazement that one day they lived in a barren place, and the next day there's literally a river of fire rolling by, causing massive amounts of steam columns to go up in the air because of the rivers hitting it. And what would modern man do with that? Because I don't think anybody other than people in Greenland, is it Greenland? I think so. Yeah, right. That's been having the recent fissures and lava flows.
Oh, it's Iceland.
Iceland, that's right. I always get those confused. Yeah, so other than them, I don't know who's like really dealing with that. But can you imagine that you own, I don't know, 30 acres of land, and you're used to farming and doing stuff, and then all of a sudden this cone just pops up in a field and starts flowing out lava, putting toxic gases and stuff in the air all of a sudden with no warning. That's the kind of stuff that I think people just can't wrap their head around. Hurricanes, maybe. I mean, because like you said, you're getting to plan out and wait for it to roll in, and hopefully, it stays mild, like you're saying. And of course, there's all those doom and gloom apocalyptic nuts that literally want society to burn, and they want massive natural disasters to entertain them. And that is kind of sick that people are like that. So yeah, if you're trying to manifest something, you should manifest to help people have good vibes, to be prepared and kind of deal with it in a non-stressful but practical way, so that there's not a big death toll.
Yeah, and manifestation with the different electromagnetic field in play right now, especially intensifying through the end of the month in October. The thoughts that we all have, if we could harness those, we really could kick this evil, this darkness, this invasive energy that's upon our planet. We could manifest as humanity on a collective thought and knock this darkness back for thousands of years. But the distractions that are thrown in front of us as the magnetic field intensity changes, it's going to be one of World War coming in, this never-ending disasters, the cometary bombardment. It's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be any other. It's going to be 1,000 different things to distract, and I'm sure AI is going to drive most of the distraction for your individual feed of things you've interacted with in the past that will grab your attention to keep your attention away from collectively interacting with others that could manifest a different reality on this planet and a different magnetic field as soon as next month. I digress, though. You're talking about archaic petroglyphs, and I'm just wondering how many times this cycle has come in and flowed out, the ebb and flow of these energies that allow us as humanity itself to manifest a different world, literally a different world in front of us. You call them archaic petroglyphs, maybe I would call them plasma petroglyphs. Because what the ancients witnessed in the sky from the Judicula Stone in North Carolina, all the way to where you are out in the southwest there, the ancients had witnessed something vast electrically in our skies that was so awe-inspiring that they took the time, even during cataclysm, to chisel it in the walls, lest we not forget what we just saw. For the next 1,000 years, 2,000 years, those of our lineage that will come down, and when we start to see these same crawling, manifesting squatter man figures in the sky, that will say, wow, we are back into this. Perhaps this would be a safety area. So, when you talk about petroglyphs, you might look at them as just a bunch of rock carvings on a wall somewhere down deep in a canyon. I'm looking at that as the number one survival place, because they were still alive to be able to carve those petroglyphs. To whatever happened to this massive cataclysm, they're still there alive, carving those into the canyon walls. So for me, I'm like, oh, that could be a new one, place to go. But again, how quickly can deserts turn to grassland and forest again, like we're seeing across the entire North Africa, Sahel, and especially western, what you consider Arabia, along the Red Sea there, Jordan, western Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, like record floods just again and again. The deserts are starting to green. And this was talked about in the Quran as well. The deserts are going to green again. They're going to become forests, grasslands, savannas once again. And we are absolutely 1,000% seeing the exact same thing. But the way they describe it, it's a returning, it's a cycle. I'm not really a religious person in that sort of sense, but when you get a lot of, foretolds in many a book and religion across the planet that all overlay and overlap into a single, channel of, all right, look for the deserts to regreen, look for minds of people to become insane, and you just start to look at the way our world's behaving right now, then really what drives that they knew the cycle was going to return? Because I am of the volition, and I will absolutely 1,000% say this tonight on the show. About a month from now, actually 2 days ago from now, at the 23rd, 24th of October, We're going to have the squaring of the gas giants in the outer solar system. And this particular squaring, as viewed from our Earth, that perception or that perfection of the way you look at those planets from our planet here, the Earth, out to the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, they form a square. This has not been seen with the same, it's like 1 degree arc of difference out of 360 degree arc. 1 degree different. And that is in the last 2,000 years, 79 AD. Now, it was seen something very similar in 1305, and that was actually in the Sporer minimum, if you're looking at grand solar minimum chronology there. And also was witnessed in 425 BC. So you can only find this a handful of times through time, literally, where we start to see this square. But the one in 1305 in the Sporer minimum was not exactly as square as it is now. So I'm looking at the human perception in this. If there's a different magnetic field forming and the Earth's going to pass through like 2 dual magnetic fields, then you look at toroid looping waves, toroid fields, and where they loop over themselves, well, there's this phenomenon called the block wall, where you get a zero field canceling effect. It's kind of like noise canceling headphones for Bose. You find the 2 waves and you synchronize them and it cancels the noise. Something very similar in toroid magnetic fields, where that loop, where those touch or intersect for that first looping, what you would consider line, there's a canceling effect there. And however deep that goes in, so if you look at Earth's magnetic field lines, you can see them, they loop around. Now, if those were to connect or intersect with another magnetic field of another planet in close proximity, then there would be a canceling effect also. And I'm just wondering how this is going to affect perception on our planet and why there's so many distractions and why there's so many earth changes. And that's another thing, you know, as I listen to this pouring rain out my window here, the temperature just dropped too in the last 10 minutes. It just became very chilly in the last 10 minutes, I must say. The amount of earth changes that we're seeing with cloud cells, jet streams, out of season snows, droughts, there's nothing that's normal anymore in our weather patterns and the systems. We're either at extreme drought or extreme flood. And we're looking at, you know, jet streams undulating. And Ransom, I sent you some of those. You look for those green graphs. That's the amount of moisture at 10 hectopascals or 85,000 feet, approximately 84,999 feet on the 10 millibar chart there that I sent you. This is how much water is in the upper atmosphere. Now, generally, it's not that high. I was trying to explain somebody the equivalent the other day of, you know, in a desert, we might measure rainfall for a total year in like feet, a foot, 2 foot, 3 foot. You might have a 3-foot rain gauge in a desert in case there's a big flood and you could get an extra. But we're talking about like a 30-foot rain gauge in comparison. Like you just don't measure that high normally. So once you get above 85,000 feet in the atmosphere, they just kind of stop measuring moisture because it's not supposed to be there. You might get the occasional meteorite come in or a rocket launch going up that'll bring some different particulates up there, but generally in the mesosphere, you're not going to see a lot of water vapor up there. So at some certain point, they're like, well, there's just no more water. And why even measure it? Because it's so far outside the norm that you're looking at like thousandths of a percent. What we're looking at with some of these charts here is thousands of times more water up there from the Hunga Tonga eruption. And I would go with Jim Lee from Climate Viewer saying now that the injection of carbon black at 70,000 feet as an ongoing geoengineering project could add into that signature that we're seeing. Because there's also a 74,000 foot at 16.6 millibars. Also, that shows something very similar, like that 70, we'll round at a 75,000 foot range. So is there a strange geoengineering project at high altitude using carbon black that we're not privy to? Because I can understand that Hungatonga would eject an enormous amount of water vapor up there and really just like cloud those layers in the mesosphere. But you're seeing this strange striation pattern now, almost as if it's being layered. Because if anybody, you've ever seen those trails come out of back of airplanes, they kind of get thin and they do that and they just come out and they get hazy skies. If you're looking at some of these charts, they don't make sense. Okay, you get this huge Hungatonga eruption, boom, just solid green. And then at the end of it, as it's coming down, if you're listening to it and you can't see the chart here, it looks like zebra stripes, like it's on, off, on, off, on, off. But in the real world, where things would start to slowly drift out of our atmosphere at a certain percentage rate per year, it should slowly taper down from incredibly dark green uniformly through into lower spectrums of green as it would be pulled out of the atmosphere, some 3 to 5 years later. And we're in that 30-year period right now. So, 14% more moisture in the atmosphere from Hungatonga. So you would expect typhoons and hurricanes to be stronger, thunderstorms to be stronger. Water spouts will come out of nowhere. We're getting bunching jet streams where we get these, rivers from the sky. If you're going to, I'll be conservative and say 10%. If you're going to add 10% more moisture to the Earth's hydrological system, then everything else would get, snarled like snakes, worms in a bunch. It's the same exact thing because heavier water vapor moves more slowly through the atmosphere. So if suddenly there's an enormous amount more water in the atmosphere, everything is going to slow down. And some of those faster moving wind currents are going to crash into the slower ones and they have nowhere to go. They're either going to go really far south or really far north, and they're going to extract moisture out of one place and they are absolutely going to dump on another. Like this uniform rainfall that we're so used to for planting and harvesting dates that we've, become accustomed to in the last 200 years, those are thrown out the window now. So it's all good luck and get the crops in when you can. Because the saddest thing about this hurricane that's come up right now is we are in the harvest time right now. And as I was driving by the night before last, I saw guys out in the field at midnight with their lights on, running their machines, trying to get anything harvested they could before this rain came. Because they understand this amount of rain going into the fields, their multi-ton machines are going to take weeks, plural, to dry out before they can get back in and harvest. And by that time, to put it into mid-October, they should have already been planting. They're already going to lay seed for the winter wheat coming in, They're way past the time at that point. So, to see farmers running midnight lights, something was very off. That was before I even knew this hurricane, and I started to hear about it and knew it was sort of drifting up this way, and they were going to talk about more moisture hitting the Appalachian. This is what I'm talking, because, Ransom, you'd said something about, like, how do people know back in the 1800s these things were coming? Well, people's joints hurt, like their knees hurt, a ski injury or so. Oh, my knee hurt once the weather changes. Like, what are those old timer signs? Like the clouds are all traveling in a single direction, whatever it is. But why was it? I'm going to say something strange. At least one day before the National Weather Service came out and said, this hurricane's coming up here, the guys were out there at midnight harvesting. And then a day later, they got the warning that the hurricane was coming up. So whoever with the old timer knowledge knew in advance to get a day start and run your machines 24/7 and get everything harvested. So, I'll agree with you, Ransom. There's some of this old timer knowledge that we're not getting, but those guys I would love. I'm actually going to stop on their door one of these days and, knock and say, before that hurricane came, you guys were like a day, 2 days early on your harvest. Like what prompted you? Because everybody else usually wait until the 1st of October before they get out and run the machines in the fields. Soybeans are totally dry around here, and they were ready to go too. So I'm just curious how they all knew in advance to get the machines out. And it wasn't really it's another, week or so before most people get started. But these guys are a bit early, and I just wonder what intuitively, perhaps. Not sure, man. But I've been rambling, Ransom. Please take the show over.
Are you ready for the UN to censor everything Or excuse me, they're not censoring, man. They just
No, we need to manifest. That does not happen. That does not occur. That is not even in my reality, nor yours or anybody listening or anybody on this planet. That is not in our reality, and they should be relegated to the dustbin of history.
well, if you think about it, their little group that gets together, you know how they have all these things like Davos and Bilderberg, and then they have their UN things. It's really a small number of people compared to the 8 billion people that live on the planet. So, like, if we were comparing who had more manifestation power, it would obviously be the citizens of the world versus the tiny elite, because we're always talking about how the elite does this and that, but they are just this really super small minority, like this guy Newsom, who's all in with the game too, wants to give everybody digital IDs so you can't interact on social media. Actually, unfortunately, manifestation or not, we could manifestation that they backtrack and move off, but their plans are already kind of go. They're already ready to do this. Internet kill switches, things like that. Maybe conspiracy theories because they don't actually have to turn it off. We can just change it in real time. So they're going to use this global AI watchdog supposedly to curb misinformation. And then you got California, you have to have an ID to get on the internet. Apple, they want you to have a digital ID too to use their products. And it just goes on and on. But I do feel somewhat like Nostradamus again. You remember, I don't know, think it was last year when I was first really hammering about the robotic warfare. And I said, you watch, Russia will use China to mass produce drones because, they've been being kind of attacked in that way. And it's showing that these multi-million-dollar old hunks of metal aren't as useful as they once were. Now, I'm sure there'll be a counter upgrade for little, systems on the tanks and artillery and things that will deal with drones, but they don't have it yet. So instead, you just fight fire with fire. And this is something I predicted, that China would be the major manufacturing center for said drones. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen. So, things are about to get really weird. All over the place, not just, in the Middle East or right next to Russia. I've been reading into all these little bordering countries with Russia, and all of them have this imagination or maybe reality that in the near future, meaning this winter, there is going to be a kinetic exchange of forces. And if NATO, is any indication, that is going to happen. I mean, we are now giving long-range weapons, bigger weapons to certain people there that are poking the bear. And it kind of makes you wonder, what exactly is the plan? And I've kind of postulated or theorized before that it may be because the original kind of nuclear disaster that happened in that area is a problem that's not going to go away, and they haven't actually dealt with it yet. So I think that there may be a nice little exchange right there around the Black Sea area. And I don't think we have to worry about China entering in. This will just be a NATO Russia exchange, a small exchange. China's newest nuclear submarine, it sank. They don't even know what's going on over there. They're trying to build stuff. They're not quite, in the same league as the U.S. But we keep seeing these articles in massive amounts of them, and for good reason, because, like I said, NATO has stepped up its proxy with Russia by giving some pretty big weapons and facility to use mass destruction with cruise missiles and other things. So Kiev launches mass drone attack on Russia day after Putin's nuclear warning. What was his nuclear warning? He said that they're going to change the way that they deal with countries, and that if a nuclear nation is using a proxy nation, then they will strike the proxy nation. And we don't want that to happen. I mean, that's just something we don't need right now. Maybe everybody will get sidetracked with us capturing a second moon. And then we can see some weird headlines like one of the nation states tried to nudge it our way to blow up one of the other countries. That's a possibility that's not really that far-fetched, considering that we have indeed messed up the orbits of some of these things already, right? So I was showing everybody when you were talking earlier this footage of a big meteorite, nice glowing green meteorite in Mexico, and they caught it in many different angles. Just and I've seen these where I live too. I sometimes sit on the porch at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I see these go by, and I wonder how many people actually have evidence of an increase in the amount of these objects rolling in, but they just don't check their security cameras because nothing happened to them. But if you just happen to see it and you do have security cameras, then you know exactly which minute to go look. And I've kind of been trying to do that and capture one like this, but these are beautiful examples. And if you can imagine this rock just being a little bit bigger, we're talking something that might actually hit the ground. And, a little tiny rock can be like a nuke going off. And, so there's nature that's also sending little devices like this that could annihilate entire cities, countries, depending on the size of it. But
can I throw a thought at you there, Ransom?
Yeah.
I got an answer for you. If anybody out there is listening, you can go to fireball.amsmeteors.org. Then you can drop in there events per year by category. And then the events with under 10 persons, between 10 and 25, that would see an event and call in or write in and say, hey, I saw that meteor. Then you could look at the ones from 25 to 50 people writing in, and then you could look at people 50 to 100, and then there's the events with 100 or more people, which are the one you just described right there. So it seems that the largest amount of meteors events seen was 2022. And this year we're at 300 already, but we're not finished with the year. So obviously we're seeing a lot more large fireballs coming in. And here was the interesting one. I started to look at by the month, and November is I guess, over the last 20 years, the number one month to see large amounts of meteors. So if we're still at 300, and the last biggest 2022 is around 522, and we're right at 300, it's like 298. November is going to be a big month. And then December is a relatively large month. It's like the, say, fourth largest, I guess, on the entire year. So November being the largest, the largest amount. So I'm wondering, in the Northern Hemisphere viewing as we're spinning around, then what is causing that debris to hit the top of the planet like that in that certain month relative to where we sit? Now, again, the American Meteor Society, excuse me, I digress. I apologize to anybody with the Meteorological Society. I didn't mean to say that, didn't mean to, degrade you at all. American Meteor Society. Because the Meteorological Society, they're compromised and they just follow the global warming, CO2 is warming everything agenda. But tracking the fireballs, so there we go, man. That's kind of your answer, but I do believe, just saying from my research here, that January begin at the end, February, March, April, you're going to see an enormous amount of more fireballs this year than we've ever seen. It's actually going to scare people on how many are coming in, how big they are, and how frequent they are in the daytime sightings, just because of the Earth will be in front of the sun, and every body in the entire solar system will be behind us, but in that particular squaring formation. So it's not as if the planets are all spread out around us, behind us on the Earth. It looks exactly like an arrowhead, where the Earth is the very tip of the arrow, and as we come back, we got the sun, and then just that sort of barely angled tip of the arrow, we got all the other planets, and whatever's there is just going to draw everything squarely into the face of our planet for about 4 months or so. So maybe this is the reason they're passing all these new laws about instant change of government. Because you were kind of sort of hinting around that, but, you can continue if you like.
That's exactly where I was going to go with this. Last week I didn't feel good, and this is what's funny is how this fits into survival because I've been inside a lot this year. I haven't really gone outside as much as I normally do. I'm normally an outside person. I take a lot of trips out into extreme areas, but this year, from winter, kind of I've been dealing with my kids and stuff, and I've been staying inside a lot more. So I hadn't been outside in some time. So we decided we had some guests from Canada and Mexico come, and we took them out to see, ironically, the three rivers out there by that lava flow we were talking about. And I was kind of mentioning to them about, look at that lava flow out there. Wouldn't it have been cool to be here? Then now, keep in mind, this is the day, and I wasn't keeping track of the solar weather, right? So this was the day of the geomagnetic storm that started in the afternoon there, and it went into the late night, and it got up to kph 9 or something like that. But one of them or both of them brought some illnesses, not on purpose, but just brought it along, and we hadn't been exposed to anything in a long time. So we kind of were getting sick right then during that geomagnetic storm at the same time as running around outside, hiking and being in a lot of sunlight and just absorbing it all in. And I got fried, like my skin got messed up, and I got a fever, and boy, I felt bad. And I was just thinking, imagine the same scenario, except for life depends on you getting up and getting food together and water because of, I don't know, whether it was like fall or winter's coming or whatever the scenario, but you can just imagine like people are out there, they're trying to prepare for stuff, and then they just get an unexpected sickness out of nowhere that puts them down and you can barely do anything. It kind of takes your man away. You feel a little less masculine, puny, as they used to say. And you have to deal with something like a incoming hurricane or, I just imagine in some of these, scenarios. But to what you were talking about, the government and how they handle things, it's funny because I was kind of sick, so you did the show last time, but I was showing everybody an article that kind of is viral right now. The idea of it, if I can find it again, and it's about the government planning for a super mass casualty event. So let me show that to everybody right here. Oh, that's the wrong one, but they're planning for that, and everybody's like, what do you mean? And so they're talking about rearranging the government in case, some thing happened that caused a mass casualty event. Now, I understand that they do this periodically, but now everybody's like, what do you mean you want to change, how continuity of government works? Because basically that's what they're hinting at. And then, you think about what kind of natural disaster would actually, push the boundaries of civil liberties, individual rights, and things like that. So we kind of know that they've already, worked on different legislation, continuity of government things, and all of these different things to make sure that if something happens, there's nobody questioning their legitimacy of power and what to do with resources, what to do with people. And a lot of people have got a little taste of what that might be like with the recent illness that might have or may not have went around and how the government's reacted to that. And I brought up Katrina. That's another example of the reality of what you think is going to happen, what's right, what's legal, and then the reality of what your government actually does in case of an emergency. Because a lot of people don't know, but during Katrina, the government ran a giant weapons transfer, gun confiscation, you can call it whatever you want, but they were going into areas that were not in emergency, disarming them, and obviously those would be the times that citizenry would need their constitutionally supposed protected rights more than any other time. So, if you don't know what not only your plans are in emergency, but their plans, and that's kind of brings me back to what I originally was talking about. Your situational awareness is the number one prepping tool that you need is what's going on, What will they do? How will they do it? What will everyone else be doing? And what am I doing? And what is each of my family, kind of, do they know what they should be doing whenever something happens? Anyway, let me find that article, and we can talk about that. What kind of mass casualty event? We talking super volcano? We talking
Yeah, it would be a volcanic
bolide?
event or a ground strike of something large from space. There's just a few options. I mean, if you want to go with the man-made options, obviously you're going to be an EMP or something like this. But if you're going to look at an earth change and something that's electromagnetic, that's non-controllable, and really is beyond the scope of any kind of human control, this brings us back into who knows this more ancient knowledge and has been preparing for this event inbound. If you were to get an enormous amount, this is what I'm envisioning here coming up as the Earth spins in front of our sun. We're out there on the actual arrow tip. Everything else behind it. The sun's behind us, Jupiter's behind us, Saturn, but they're sort of in a square behind the sun. So it's literally a direct pull into the face of our planet for 3 to 4 months. Now, as you start to see daytime fireball after daytime fireball, that alone would be unnerving for a lot of people because they're going to see it in real time. And it's going to be way, 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 way more frequent than it is now. But then if you get some of these, like Chelyabinsk, these, airburst type of shockwave events that'll blast windows and this sort of thing, that is going to absolutely rattle people's psyche. But if we were going to get a bunch of debris raining in and actually hitting the ground surface in cities from small to large, then you have to wonder on, like you said, the government side, these tungsten rods from space that would be thrown in on purpose to confuse and obfuscate and ride on top of a natural cycle to create this chaos. Because this inbound meteor shower thing coming in the spring of next year, it is what it is. I mean, it's just a cycle. It's truly a cycle. And when you look back at ancient history and you go back some 2,000 years, we come into the birth of Christ, that era of the change of an age. I mean, we can into Pisces at the same time. So you look at the birth of a new prophet, but you're looking at the change of an age as well. And you're marching through all these different times from Aries, Taurus, and you come into Pisces, and now we're going into Aquarius. These shifts. And then if you go back further into Leo, the lion, the Sphinx, that was repurposed from the original, what you consider face on it. That what you can see as one of the supposed rulers of Egypt of the early dynastic kingdoms. That was a repurposed lion face from the times going back further of Leo. So when you start to look at all these major signs and I guess iconography or pictures of the time that were carved in stone, literally, like these last 2,000 years, it's all been about the fish. When you go back further, it's all about the ram. It's about the bull. It's about the lion. They were marking the ages of what we understand as the zodiacal signs going around the procession. But at what point was it really Leo, not from this current time, 6,000 or 8,000 years ago, but prior, that we were really going back 16,000 years ago? Was it 2 cycles ago of Leo? Because I visited a fair few museums in Venice, and I kept seeing that again and again and again. All we saw were, it was more of the modern era time. It was Aries, Taurus, Pisces. That was it. I didn't really see anything further until we went back. Ancient Greece, further back, they had recorded the last chapter of history beyond that. You go into Babylonia, you start to look at some of the, shall we say, gods that they worship. That's a bad word to use. Deities is a better word. Something that was considered magic of the time. that was literally larger than life of anything that they had known that came down with superpowers. And I would say deities, not gods, because they were just of anything would be indistinguishable from magic that was highly advanced in technology. So, you go 200,000 in the future, 200 years or 200,000 years in the future with technology, and you come down today with us, we would think it was magic. We would think some sort of beings were returning. I mean, Project Bluebeam and all this garbage they talk about, it wouldn't surprise me if, it was really something technological that came back to try to say, hey, we're back. And by the way, it's just nothing more than we have better tech than you. And we can plug something into your brain waves. We don't even need the wires. We don't need the sound anymore. We just throw it in there for you. Telepathy.
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the progenitors of great civilizations, or if they knew when their empires would fall and disappear into history. Fortunately for us as modern man, we can recognize that we are at the precipice, a point in history where we can see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us.
How do you feed your families when the shelves are empty, the stores are shut, and there's no food available? What is the fastest, easiest, and most productive foods to grow? What is the quickest way to get somebody who has no skills at all up and running and producing very quickly? If you understand that we're at a point in history where it is no longer optional to be growing your own food, if you're really freaked out and concerned because you've never grown food before and you don't have any skills, you don't know how to do that, but you know how important it is, then I want to let you know, however you stumbled here, you're in the right place. My name is Marjorie Wildcraft. I'm the founder of the Grow Network, and I have been the female leader in the survival and preparedness space for the last 20 years.
How to grow lots of food, even if you have no experience, are older and out of shape. This is for people who want the fastest and easiest ways to produce healthy and delicious meat, eggs, and vegetables. Because you know that growing your own food is like printing your own money. During this webinar, you will get status of global food shortages, how long the crisis will last, how much space you need to grow food, easiest, highest calorie foods you can produce, a complete plan for producing all the food you need, how to get started today, regardless of season. Marjorie will show you the fastest, easiest, and simplest ways to produce calories and nutrition, especially in a crisis and/or grid-down situation. The assumption is that you have no experience and you need to start producing food immediately. The most popular part of the webinar is the Q&A session at the end. So please come prepared with your questions.
Pro Clear Cleanse is the most powerful spray cleaner on the market today. No elbow grease necessary. Pro Clear Cleanse cuts through grease and grime like a chef's knife. Finally, the one cleaner that can do it all. Powerful surfactant cleaning technology cleans ovens, glass, porcelain, even polished wood. Environmentally friendly, less packaging and waste with no harsh smells, pet safe, child safe. 5 tablets equals 1 bottle of traditional cleaner. It's 5 months of cleaning for a fraction of the cost. Behold the grease-erasing power of Odor Crush. Simply drop a tablet into your bottle of warm water and shake it so it is evenly diluted. Spray the surface you want cleaned. Let set longer for tougher grease. Take a paper towel or a reusable cloth and wipe. Done and done.
Howdy, partner. You know people are having dinner and the smart ones are eating beef. Let me tell you a brief history, or more accurately, a beef history of dinner. Domestication of cattle happened around 8000 BC, but that's not when beef became what's for dinner. We've been eating beef since times before history. The earliest cave paintings have beef eloquently depicted on the walls. Those cave drawings of the hunt were for the aurochs, a primitive bovine. That's right, beef. Like I said, people are having dinner now, and the smart ones, well, they're eating beef. Americans want great food today, but we also want to have great food to eat if things go south in a hurry. Unlike most companies that take the cheapest, worst parts of the cow, then turn them into beef crumbles, whatever that is. They freeze-dry them in hopes that their customers will never actually try to eat it. Our premium beef cubes are sous vide, freeze-dried, and ready to be eaten right now, or in a decade from now. We want you to eat our beef now, so you can buy more. Prep with steaks, not with beef crumbles. This is a high-quality product. It's all American beef and 100% natural. None of that craziness of lab-grown meat and mRNA jabs. Our beef has a shelf life of 10 plus years. This is high-quality cooked and freeze-dried beef for long-term storage or not. Eat well today and eat well tomorrow. Click the link in the description to get your Prepper beef with Prepper All Naturals, so you will always know what's for dinner.
Don't forget to sign up for the show notes to get information we sometimes can't relay on social media outlets. Sign up at oilseedcrops.org/MIAC radio show.
Looking at this is an event to behold that we are seeing here. You know, this is one of the largest rain events coming up as a tropical system since 1848, so they say. One site said 1858, and the other sites are saying 1848. So I'm kind of, you know, it's one of those two. And again, you know, if you go back further in history, a little bit obfuscated there. So weather warnings out across East Tennessee, high wind warnings, flash flood warnings. The high wind warnings are pushing it up 40 to 60 mile an hour, 80 mile an hour gusts. Almost every road that we drove by today going up. We drove by to go just check it out earlier, going up to Indian Boundary, road closed. If you're local and you live up there, you got ID, they'll let you go up to get home. But if you're just going to be somebody driving up there, they close the entire mountain range here, going up anywhere into the Smoky Mountains, Cherokee National Forest, Cherahela, anything. Everything's closed with high wind warnings, 80 mile an hour gusts they're looking for. And I can attest, even on the break, the rain really started to pick up in like the last 2 to 3 minutes here. Definitely heavier than it was. And looking across here, almost everything in North Carolina, I mean, everything is flash flood warnings. And as we look down from Chattanooga to Knoxville, down here in southeast corner, if you will, heavier rain bands are starting to make their way through. So as we get to probably 2, 3 a.m., tornado warnings are going to be following on this backside of the typhoon, or, you know, hurricane, whatever you like to term that just landed over Florida there. I mean, literally just minutes ago during the break, it made landfall. So, historic hurricane. And another thing about this hurricane, it's the widest hurricane ever recorded during this time of the year in September. So the width of a hurricane, like how wide it is from the north or from the east to the west, north to the south, this is the widest one, double the size of anything they've ever recorded before, which is strange in itself. But again, if you have more moisture in the atmosphere, for example, from the Hunga Tonga eruption in 2022, that moisture is now starting to make its way out of the upper levels of the atmosphere down into where weather forms, quote unquote, 20,000 to say 35,000 feet. That is going to start to add into a lot more systems. So if you're looking at more moisture, double the width of any other hurricane ever recorded at this time of the year, double the width, not a quarter, not half as much, double. It's the widest storm ever recorded. Now put that in perspective. This is the longest, biggest, giantest, if that's even a word, most gigantic east to west in a breadth storm that's ever been measured. And, you know, it jumped from category 3 to category 5 just as it made landfall. So, you know, some of these projections that were from the National Weather Service coming up here into the Appalachian Mountains, they're off by a little bit. It's going to be way stronger than they anticipated. And the new updates aren't even up yet. They'll be coming up at midnight here. So expect heavier rain densities, severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings that are starting to come off of the backside of the hurricane, especially in South Carolina, as that moisture is getting pulled from the ocean right in. It meets those mountains right there as it comes off the coast. So, you know, could you expect something in the Appalachian chain too? It's all getting dragged up here. And North Carolina, with the backside of the storms pulling from east to west, that rain out, we're getting part of it. But that eye of the storm is slated to come directly, literally over my house tomorrow morning. So we'll see where it goes. It's going to land somewhere in the eye of the storm as it becomes a tropical depression after it passes Atlanta. It's going to land somewhere between Chattanooga and Knoxville. And I'm down here on the Cherokee National Forest edge of the boundary here. So that looks like it is depression's going to sling over the house. We're going to try to live broadcast tomorrow morning. I'll be up at probably 5 a.m. I can't sleep during these incredibly energetic events. I've always had trouble sleeping during these. They energize me. Some people get sleepy and scared, but I get energized. I just can't sleep a wink during these kind of storms. I really can't. You know, it's not that it's exciting. It's just, I don't know, my senses are heightened. And before we get into the show, Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us speak tonight. And if anybody out there really appreciates free speech and, you know, just letting us talk freely without any boundaries, whether you agree with us, disagree, I mean, do your own research. I don't want you to believe a thing I'm saying tonight. I want you to do your own research, except I'm looking at satellite feeds. Otherwise, some of the subjects we're talking about, don't believe me. Do your own research. And that's the way it should be. You shouldn't have to regulate my speech. I should be able to say what I want. And if you don't want to agree with me or you don't want to listen to the concepts that Ransom and I want to talk about, cool, turn the dial. You don't need to listen to us. If you think we're saying something that's a non-truth, great. Research it and then throw it to us and we'll try to respond to it. But you don't need to censor us and turn our voices off because we don't agree with global warming. At least I don't. I can't speak for Ransom. He speaks for himself. But me, I believe it's driven by the sun. Not CO2, not you. It's the sun. And that's my statement from myself. All right, Thomas just sent us photos in here. Let's take a look. Coming off the Ham Network. Oh, thank you. Key messages for Hurricane Helene. Yeah, they've slightly adjusted because it is coming in at a higher it was Category 5 versus 4. All right, again, just for those out there listening, the Hurricane Watch Net, the HWN, is set to activate. So if you're on the Ham, 20-meter band, 14.325 megahertz, that's on USB, will begin. It's already at 10 a.m. until losing propagation tomorrow. So they should be live already. We'll see. 40-meter band, 7.268 megahertz. That's LSB. And again, the net will remain active on the frequency through the day and overnight for as long as propagation allows. So if you're looking for updates, please kick those in. Remember, you can listen to Ham even if you don't have your license. You can listen. You cannot broadcast 20-meter band, 14.325 megahertz, 40-meter band, 7.268 megahertz. And make sure you got your WX stations on if you really want to listen to something. Depending on where you are, current speeds have been adjusted upward for the storm ferocity coming in. So whatever you have seen in terms of forecast, Appalachia, it's going to be a little more intense with higher rainfall totals than were initially given over the last 6 hours. This is going to increase. So look for the adjusted figures coming in at midnight tonight, 12 p.m. or 0. I can hear the rain increasing outside too yet again. So Ransom, I was kind of distracted looking there at the weather. Oh, I will say one thing. You know, you talked about Ransom before the show. You know, if everybody got ready out there, like my generator is ready. I fired it up earlier. We got all the cords run in. We got splitters on everything. I got battery backups on all my gear. So if the power goes out, it'll literally take me less than a minute to run to the garage with my headlamp, fire up the generator because the cords are already laid out, replug in everything, and it should stay online as long as we don't lose the internet on a catastrophic tree crashing down over our cables here. But that's like pre-preparedness. You know, we're kind of prepared. We got the lights laying around the house. The cables are already run in. It's just like literally pull the generator and it runs and everything's ready to reestablish within under 5 minutes. So, Ransom, you'd mentioned something like that when we started the show earlier. Welcome back, everybody. And that's just kind of a strange and unusual night with the hurricane making landfall and the record rains. This will be some of the largest rains in 150 years seen here in the Appalachia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina area. So, what kind of energies could you expect in a once in 150-year storm? And are you sensitive to that?
I don't know.
So, Ransom, I digress. Show is yours, man. Take it away.
I'm so glad I don't live anywhere near these places that have this 140-mile-an-hour wind now, right? That's pretty strong. And I was looking at the thing. This is
Thank you, Thomas.
the main thing that people need to be worried about right now is the storm surge coming in, because it's just crossing over right now. But look at all of these major, Atlanta, Knoxville, and then it's going to whip around and hit Nashville. So probably Knoxville will get hit twice, basically, with torrential rains. Athens, there's some pretty good sized towns all the way down from Tallahassee up that are just going to get hammered with rain. So, yeah, I hope that those people are prepared. I hope they didn't think it was a joke that if they're in the line of this. And it's not just, we kind of all keep track of the eye of the storm, but it's really the big circle around it that everybody gets flooded out on. And like you were talking about earlier, you get tornado. I think there's at least 4 or 5 warnings right now for tornadoes in different spots around this. And then the temperature right now, it's actually quite warm there. So, the land is going to absorb a lot of energy in the form of rainfall. I think it did, if I wasn't mistaken, it said 27 inches, 27.70 inches. And what were you saying there?
Yeah, in some locales, especially in North Carolina, but you're right. When it comes into Nashville and they're looking at 6 inches plus of rain, I mean, that is a city stopper. And, all those, hipsters out there going in to buy like one egg sandwich to get them through the night or something, like, oh, the store will be open in the morning. Like, there's a lot of people with that mentality in Nashville, and I'm not bashing on Nashville. It's just the city hipsters, they think they know everything, and they've only ever known cities, grown up in cities, but they really haven't experienced nature's ferocity in a city before. And they're about to learn that if their water turns off and they got like an egg sandwich and that's all they got because they thought, Whole Foods would be open in the morning. Well, nobody's going to Whole Foods in the morning because you got 6 inches of rain coming in the city that's going to flood. Although, downtown, a lot of area is on the hill, but once you get down near Music Street, man, that is going to get totally flooded, and especially some of those overpasses and coming into downtown too. I mean, yeah, it's going to be just. They're never going to. They're not going to. This is a once in 150-year flood. So Nashville, look out.
Right, all of them, like Tallahassee, Columbus. I mean, there's a lot of big stuff that's in the line of fire here. And most of these people, they might prep for tornadoes in this area, but not usually a hurricane like this. I don't know why, because it happens quite often, whether it comes off of the East Coast or up from the Gulf, that people get flooded out. And I've drove through Nashville and Knoxville so many times when it was just a regular everyday thunderstorm for the people that live there. And I was thinking, damn, all these interstates and intersections through here, it's all congested. People are speeding. You got these giant semi trucks going through, throwing big waves of water over your car, pushing you off. And that's in just normal weather. That's not even this kind of weather. So you imagine what's going to be happening in the traffic, like in Atlanta or Knoxville, Nashville, even Chattanooga, all of them places. And then if you look at, I got the map up. If you look out at the further bands, you have Savannah and Charleston, Columbia, all of that stuff. Lots of flooding. Watching, you're going to hear, hopefully not, because like I was saying, in the 1800s, you couldn't just go, well, it looks like this hurricane's going to blow right over my house. Maybe I should prepare for that. And they didn't have that. Like you said, maybe their knees started hurting when the barometric pressure changed. And, the one guy in town that had a barometer was like, uh-oh, yeah, but that's too late. That's what it's coming on top of you, and the air pressures are changing and stuff. What we deal with a lot out here whenever there's major thunderstorms is the fact that we deal with flatland right next to high altitude mountains. And the mountains are usually what collects all the water, and then it pours down and flash floods and people drown and all that stuff. And if you've had forest fires or anything like they did near here. So they got hit with the giant forest fire that burned everybody out, and then they all came back. And then we had monsoon, which did massive flooding, washed away the roads, drowned a couple people, things like that. And that was just a little monsoon storm. This is a giant hurricane that's rolling through, and it's going to dump right there, like you said, along the Appalachian Mountains. So you could look forward to all kinds of flooding there. I think we're going to get some rather striking videos here in the next few days from this area all the way through from Florida up to Tennessee. I hope not, but
Well, I know, but then there's a new high wind warning here for this part of East Tennessee. It's a new high wind warning. They've bumped up the speed. So it was from 8 p.m. This evening to 8 p.m. Friday, but they moved the speed up. So it was 25 to 40 miles an hour with gusts up to 65. The new warning is gusts up to 80 miles an hour. So again, some of these areas at higher elevations were at 80 miles an hour, but where we are at sort of mid elevation, they bumped it up to 80. So I'm curious, what the new warnings are going to be for higher elevations. If they're pushing it to 80 down a little bit lower in elevation, if you're up there camping and you're listening to this, you all need to hunker down. If you're up on some of the campgrounds, Indian boundary and more, northward higher up into the elevations, y'all are going to get hit seriously hard tonight with winds. And 80 miles an hour, that's no joke in the mountains. It's not about the wind. It's more about the trees that are coming down, like the debris coming out of the trees. And these flash floods coming out, you might have a little creek that's, 2-3 feet wide, and it turns into a 40-foot wide creek, 15, 20 feet deep in a matter of seconds. Because we went up for Labor Day, there'd been a couple floods before then, and, I was absolutely gobsmacked with my jaw on the ground when we drove down a couple, dirt roads coming over the back pass. If you go to Indian Boundary down to Citico Creek, it's all really very, it's nicely kept dirt roads, but it's a very long drive, like 3.5 hours if you want to go over that way. And it's very, very remote. But you come by an enormous amount of little small streams coming in that feed into some tributaries there. I'm talking like the little small stream coming into a little tributary there was carrying 80-foot logs with it that got washed down from a little tiny stream that didn't make it to the tributary. Like these flash floods are no joke, especially in the mountains. I mean, an 80-foot tall tree, multiples, just stacks, like 20-foot tall, like stacks of these 80-foot logs just rolled down what was a 5-foot creek, maybe 3 feet wide, 4 feet wide, that just got just massive flash floods. And I actually stopped on the side of the road, and I was literally looking at that going, that is impossible, literally impossible. But I saw it with my own eyes. Like the size of these trees that were in that little tiny stream, I sat there and go, no, that can't be. That can't be right. Something that's so far out of your perception of anything possible to be something. And I sat there for just, a couple minutes because we stopped to take the dogs out and just sit next to the creek and have a little lunch because there's some flat rocks and thing there. But sitting there looking at that going, what? How is that even possible? The size of the trees was just so enormous. For you're almost looking at giants walking down staircases. I looked at, the perceived amount of water that it would have taken, the ferocity and just like how much water. And this creek, I could have jumped over. Literally, I could have just taken a step over it to jump to the other side. Brought, dozens and dozens of 80-foot long trees that have been ripped out and dragged down there. That's how much extra water flows in on these flash floods. So if anybody's listening out there, even if you're near a very, very small creek and they're coming into this type of rainfall and flash flooding, oh my, anything is possible. I mean, does it scour it down to bedrock? Perhaps. But does it rip something out further up there with landslides and just flush it? Oh yeah, that's very possible. I've seen things after those floods that I didn't think were possible ever in your wildest dream of there. That's really You have to re-question your reality when looking at some of the possibilities of the floodwaters and with the damage and the debris they can drag down. That's really unthinkable. And, if you could have been there with me to even look at just even standing there for a second, that is impossible. So be careful up there if you're crossing streams, because what you think is literally impossible is very, very possible. So precautionary preparedness is like an understatement in a lot of these things when they're talking about preparedness, precaution. Should be extreme danger, and you should move from that point. It should not be like just be prepared and be cautious. It should be everything is extreme danger until it's verified not to be, especially if you're in the mountains at the moment. So I was going to go somewhere with the thought, but I forgot, man. Just jump back in, please.
No, I was looking up while you were talking, like how many people are already out of power. There's already 1 million people out of power in Florida. And actually, I'm waiting to see the other states light up here, like South Carolina and Tennessee. Because
Georgia will be next. Follow on Georgia. Georgia will be the biggest one next because they had the big thing, especially around Atlanta area and stuff. Yeah.
Right. They already have 30,000 out of power now. And then up to 12,000 already out in North Carolina. Yeah. So I hope you have your flashlights. Right. That's one of the most basic things that I teach my children. Even my toddlers now know, they have a flashlight. And their flashlight is just like a little bit of power, right? It's like the campfire kind of mentality. If you have a light, no matter what's going on, it just doesn't seem that bad because you can see what you're doing, right? And that's like a basic thing that everybody should have. I personally think that, and this has nothing to do with the storms, but it does come in handy, a lighter, a flashlight, and a knife. Those are like 3 items that whether you're male or female, you should have with you at all times. No telling, what will happen, but the light, if you've ever been in a building where the power goes out, boom, nobody can see. Now they have a bunch of cell phones, but they're very dim. And I want a light that I can see. I want to see out further than I am, like into a field a few hundred feet. I want to see what kind of dangers are actually outside. And like you were talking about, all the limbs falling. When's the last time a hurricane rolled right up the Appalachian in such a straight line as the mountains to shake loose and break all of those? So that's what kind of to, circle back to the power outages. That's what I'm expecting to see is a bunch of power outage. I mean, even with the floods and all of that, like you were saying, tree branches falling down from the wind and all these places where people don't, generally deal with that kind of wind speed. So they haven't been trimming them off and cutting them. And you always find, unfortunately, that I'm not going to call it laziness, but not being prepared, right? So the same thing that will mess you up in a hurricane, mess your house up, is the same thing as if you live out west and you're worried about wildfires. If you don't have a clear section around where you live, like where I live, it's a nightmare waiting to happen because there's so many properties in a row with flammable buildings, right? So if there were to be a fire and the wind blew in the right direction, everything goes up like a Christmas tree. It just, boom, it's gone. The wind will burn it. And so if you live out west, you have to have a buffer zone around your house, especially if you have property out in a rural area, in the forest, wherever. It doesn't matter what the government's telling you to do. You need to have a clear, open space around your house where nothing's falling on it or there's not big, piles of flammable material. And the same goes is if you live out east and you're worried about storms coming in. That same principle will keep your house from being impaled. The electricity being, thrown together right there near your home where you have potential fires, structure fires, and things like that. But as far as the power going out, you're not going to be able to do nothing about that because, all of the lines that go down rural roads and down the highways and stuff under the trees. And actually, Tennessee does a pretty good job of trimming, as far as I remember going through on interstates, but not so much for the other states around there until you get down into Florida. So there's going to be a lot of power out, and no telling what people will do. As a personal experience I had one time, I think it was about 2000 or 2001, maybe. Really big ice storm blew through Oklahoma and Arkansas, Kansas, Nebraska, all of that. But in Arkansas, everything froze over with like a half inch of ice that just formed on everything from the water coming down and it would freeze. The roads were like crystal, pass, crunchy. If you had some good tires, you could kind of drive right over it. But immediately, within the very first night of this power outage that happened because of all the ice breaking apart on the lines and different stuff, people were out in four-wheelers. They were out in four-wheel drive cars with no tags and things like that, robbing the stores, robbing the convenience stores and the food stores and things like that. And this is just immediate looting just because they knew that no one was going to be driving around for the next 24 hours. So if you can imagine that happens every single time. And I'm kind of with the guy in Florida. I don't know if you heard him, the sheriff down there. He said, if a looter comes to your house, turn him into Swiss cheese. That'll teach them and other people that looting is not going to be dealt with. And he's talking about doing it from the property owner's point of view. Just like I was saying, don't wait for government to help you. You better be prepared on your own for everything that can happen, especially a massive storm coming in with potential floods, power outages, and people wrecking on the highways because, there's always a ton of people that go out driving during the worst conditions. And then, each little cosm of somebody having an emergency kind of spreads to other people to deal with it. And then, you might be lucky if you do have emergency services that get to you in time. So the best bet is just to prepare for yourself and have all the supplies that you could possibly need. Know your way out. As they say, when in doubt, know your way out.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my neighbors who lives on the other side of the mountain from me, and he's like, his wife made some stuffed peppers and cabbage in advance in case they lose power. And then, one interesting thing is like the road crossing, I'm reading the message right here, the road crossing the creek before you get up to the mountain here, because they live up in you got to cross over to get to their place. Usually floods, but subsides pretty fast after the rain. And then I wrote him back and said, yeah, same here. This big pond we have in front of our house here floods and actually, blocks the road and everything. You can't get through. That stops the looters. Right. But if they do get up here, it's the same thing. Like, looters beware in Tennessee. That's why they don't come here.
Right.
I mean, they literally don't. But anyway, we had those natural barriers between us. So their creek floods. So once they know these big, storms are coming, they get up in there and they make sure they're tucked in there, because literally when it comes, or I don't care how much money you have, nobody's going to fly in a helicopter up there. Nobody's going to take you across the bridge. You're literally stuck. You can't get back to your place until the storm subsides. So that is a natural barrier between you and anybody wanting to do you harm. Well, the same here. Like when this pond floods, which is already, I'm sure it already is. I haven't been out, but I'm sure when I go down there, the entire road's blocked. And the only way back through is through my neighbor's property on the back here. And it's really muddy. You're not going to drive through. You might walk. But I don't know that many looters that are going to walk into a place many, many miles. They're opportunists. They want to drive in. They want to hit and run. So, sometimes you might look at these events and go, well, we got snowed in for 2 days, but you know what? You were protected by nature from the looters during those days because they just can't get there. And you also have to think about that way in protective in terms of a grid down or some sort of more longer term situation that's not a natural weather event, whether it be an electrical outage or some sort of, earthquake or volcanic eruption or something, supply chains break down completely and people start wandering out looking for food and resources. It's just, when does your community come together? And I know you have spats with the neighbors and sometimes you're like, with your neighbors, but if it really came push to shove, I think everybody would come together, even though, in the small things just to create something out in the country. You need some drama somewhere. People just create drama because they need drama. I don't know. But, all that kind of ceases when it really comes down to people protecting themselves.
You
But
know
that
what?
is the thing. Like looters don't come here, and you should be prepared that if it does, then how are you gonna? What would your reaction be, Ransom? If like looters come up to your house and they were gonna take and try to break in and get things,
I'd
would your
plead the
place be
fifth.
an easy target, or would it be a difficult target and make them want to move further down the road somewhere else? But then that's the problem too. Would you want to protect the people where they're moving to next? This is where you get into the conundrum. Okay, your place is super safe. You've driven them out, but they're going to move elsewhere and then go try to raid some other place. And this is where, it starts to get into that, when do you draw a line somewhere?
Well, you got to draw a line somewhere eventually, but where I live, I would say I'm probably not as safe as where you're at as far as dealing with a lot of people. But if it's a few people, I'm going to plead the fifth. But I'm going to say, they might regret it. So they might want to back off. But, if they're larger amounts of people, I'm not going to sit here and go down with the Alamo. I mean, my property is not worth that much to, they can have it. You should have been gone already if things are that bad. You know what? But I was going to ask you, some people talk about, oh, doom and gloom and blah, blah, blah. And my opinion on it is maybe it fizzles out and does nothing, hopefully, right? But would you really feel silly if you were completely prepared and nothing actually really happened? It wasn't that bad, no big deal, you had it handled, and you had that knowledge that if it would have got worse, you would have probably had it handled also. Would you rather feel silly with that, or feel silly when things got extremely bad because you didn't really think it was going to, and kind of, took everything with a grain of salt? Oh, this has happened before. It's never a big deal. It is never a big deal until it just happens to happen to you where you're at, whatever emergency arises. And I would rather feel silly being overly prepared when nothing happens than I would feeling silly where I'm essentially with everyone else, a deer in the headlights with no plan, no thoughts on it, no logistics, no preparation of any kind, and at the whim of not only the public, but the government and nature. Who wants to be in that kind of silly position? I would rather be in a silly position of, oh, well, I overprepared. Oh, well, you know what? Here's all of the supplies I need for next time. If next time happens and it don't go so well, I'm already still prepared, as long as you're upkeeping things. My point being is, like, I would rather feel silly for over preparing than, feel silly for not preparing or under preparing. And so, there's probably going to be tragedy, whether or not, it's massive or not, who knows? Hopefully not. And sometimes it's not. And sometimes these things fizzle out and they're not as bad as predicted. And other times they just catch people off guard. And, I hate to use Katrina, but it's a good example. They kind of actually knew then that it was going to be bad and didn't prepare. And we had, God knows how many people actually died from that or got missing or displaced. And who knows on all of these? I know numbers go uncounted because not everybody has somebody looking for them. But these are in our time, at least right now, and the information we have, which is drying up. I can't Google things anymore because now it filters everything with AI. All the new phones do that. They don't actually use the search engine. They filter it through the AI first, then they search. So information is disappearing, but we still have access supposedly to this kind of weather information where we know approximately about where millions of people should be getting their stuff together in preparation, just in case, not because of, but just in case things don't go hunky-dory, which sometimes they don't. And I don't want to harp on that, but really, you can't expect groups of other people to find you special and important and come save you. You should have already been able to save yourself. True, there are some good emergency responders and networks out there to deal with emergency, but for the most part, it's after the emergency already happened, not before. They're not going to be out at your house, making sure that you got food, water, lights, that, you know where to go. Do you know the high places around where you live? Do you know where you could go if you did need help if you're not prepared? Do you even know that? A lot of people in Florida last time had help available, but they didn't know where to go get it because everything was turned off, no cell phone service, et cetera, no power. and they had never thought about it. They had never looked it up. They had never, refreshed the idea. And this is a secret to anybody that likes to travel. Whenever I travel somewhere, I know exactly where I'm at when I get there. In other words, I look to see where it's at. I memorize the streets around where I'm going. I see all of the potential resources that could possibly be there as far as stores and franchises and things like that. And I always plan a way out fast as possible in case I don't want to be there anymore. And you should do that too with just where you live. Matter of fact, you should know that about where you live. I guarantee you that the majority of Americans, if someone breached their home and they had to flee their home, they would get lost right around their home because they don't know where to go, because they've never been outside, because they've never walked around. They didn't familiarize themselves with anything other than where they drive. And driving and walking are way two different ideas and realities. So, yeah. That's just a little tidbit that I do. I don't know if that, I'm delusions of grandeur or whatever, but I do like to at least think that I know the layout and the topographic situation where I'm going. Like, where do you go? What if you're by the ocean and something happens and you're not from the area? Do you recognize the signs on when it's time to go, it's time to leave, or you die? I mean, because evidently, over and over again, people don't know that or don't take it seriously, and then they end up as a news story on CNN.
Yeah, you mentioned the high spots, like where's your high spot in a flood? Well, you should also know where the low spots are, because I know within many, many miles of here, every time it floods where you cannot go. And I go there to try to take pictures to show sometimes when it really floods. So we had a 6.5-inch rainstorm last year, which completely flooded the barn and made me redo irrigation and like water flows around the barn. But in that morning afterward, just as soon as it got light, I wanted to go try to drive around, and the whole thing in front of my place was flooded, so I had to wait for a few hours until it came down. I got a 4-wheel drive, I got to pick up, and was able to get out through there because I knew where the road was and whatnot. It wasn't flowing water or anything at that point. It kind of just become stagnant because the flow stopped. But I know where all the low spots are. See, you got to think of the inverse. If you're going to think about where the high spots are to try to outrun the flood, you should know where the low spots are too, where the water is going to pool first, because you're going to get trapped there first. It's about the yin yang of the whole thing as well. Okay, so where do you know where there's wind tunneling effects? And where do you know to hide behind a mountain in a certain wind flow pattern from southeast, northeast, east, whatever it is, that you can hide from wind? It's the same thing. I know where the cool places on my property are, because in the summertime, if you want to take a break, if you're out doing some field work, there's a couple places where I can tuck in, and I know they're wind tunnels already. And that's where you go for natural air con in the summertime. But I sure wouldn't want to be there in the winter, because the same winds are going to blow through and chill you. And I sure wouldn't want to be there tonight when there's 80-mile-an-hour winds or 60 or 40-mile-an-hour winds, because that is going to be an amplified wind tunnel. There's no overhanging branches there because they're always broken off, because the winds always just like crush through there. And you get, knowing your own property or knowing your neighborhood or knowing your city. This is the basics that we've lost. And I agree with you, Ransom, like having a paper map and learning that sort of thing, and how to use a compass if you can. Like I learned how to travel with the Lonely Planet book. Like there was no mobile phones when I first was traveling. It was Lonely Planet, and maybe somebody gave you a map that you traveled. They were coming back from the same place, and they had some sort of city or tourist map that was rudimentarily drawn that you could pick up and go, "Whoa, I got a map of this place. It's outside the Lonely Planet book. No way, I got extra gold." That's the way it used to be. But now with all these apps on the phones, people can't read, they don't even know the direction of the city. So you could be in like a gridded city where it's a perfect grid, and people still can't know which direction they're going, even though the sun sets in the west and everything's set east, west, north, south on a grid in a city, and they still get lost on a perfect east, south, northwest grid. They literally don't know how the sun moves through the sky, and they get lost in that kind of a city, in a modern city that's been set out like that. Crazy, absolutely crazy. Like the skills that used to keep us alive are being totally, absolutely either evaporated or lost on purpose. Like these skills are not passed down from generation to generation any longer. I mean, Ransom guy and I are going to be some of the last guys standing. If we needed to be use a map and a compass to get somewhere, you know, if you really boil it down to that, where if there's some sort of, you know, God forbid there would be an EMP and all your electronics stop, the only people that are going to know how to navigate will be those who can really get paper maps. And I have paper maps from North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia in my car. Because even if you can't walk, or even if you can't drive, you could walk, get a motorbike, get a bicycle, get out of there somehow. When you come to somewhere, you should know which direction you need to go to get to the next place. Now, I'm not a fan of going into population centers after something large like that would happen. But at least when you get to a crossroad, you know which way to go to the next place that might seem the safest for you. You know, and that skill of reading a paper map is long gone. I mean, there's very few people who really know how to read paper maps. Older generation, like my dad, you could drop him off in the middle of the desert and throw a map in his hand, and he'd get out of there in like a second. He would go, oh, well, let me just go over see. I'm going to go to the high point over here, and I'm going to look, and I think in this topographic, it looks like this mountain, maybe like here. We could look over there. We could, hey, triangulate on this side, and then boom, oh, I think there's a road down there, and then he'd find it. But that's my dad. But a lot of people, that's the older generation. You know, you come a generation under me, and then they're all digital. And that's kind of a scary thing, you know. How are they going to teach their kids? That's the whole thing is, okay, they've lost the skill. One generation below, maybe two. But, I mean, beyond that, who teaches those coming up? Just a very select crew will have that skill set. You know, these battery backups. And, you know, one thing I realized I didn't have this time was a checklist. All right, so I was looking for a couple things. I would say I had 80% of this stuff, but I was still looking for one of my phone charger, battery pack, solar pad, or, you know, the battery bank. But it was a solar powered one. I'm like, where is that thing? And then I have two different radios. One's weather radio, hand cranked, and then the other one's just a battery powered, rechargeable WeatherX radio. But I couldn't find that one, and I forgot I had it in my backpack. And, you know, just little things like that. I should have been a little better organized. Like when I come back from somewhere, like we went camping, so I brought the little easy one with me so we could listen to some tunes in the mountains. And we still would have the weather radio with us, and I kept it in my backpack. I forgot I had it in a different place. So just even me and being over-prepared, great. I'm glad I'm over-prepared. You know why? Because that means I am prepared. I don't care if I'm super way over-prepared. Doesn't matter. You know what that means? I am prepared. That's the whole thing is you are or you aren't. There's no middle ground. I don't care if you're semi-prepared, a little prepared, or over-prepared. It means you are. And that means that you have resources to help others that are in a situation where they are not. And that's the whole thing. It's great to be prepared and say, like, yeah, you know, I can live for weeks out here and, you know, grid down, and I got generator and I got solar panel and we got all this kind of Generacs and, you know, this, that, and the other. Neighbors have that too. But what about those people that don't have it that you can help? And that's the whole thing that kind of gets lost in this prepping community is, at least on a lot of people, I'm not going to say everybody, but a lot is, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to have my food and my water and I'm ready for everything. But they're really not thinking about the others out there that might not have it. But again, there's a fine line between helping people and those who are going to come and take advantage of you. You know, but you should know your local municipality area of people who really might be in need that didn't get prepared because they're just that kind of person that, you know, that next door neighbor. Again, you know, they got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and they think they're stocked up in their fridge. You know, my sister's told me she's gone to their friend's house and they got kids, you know, and they got like Kool-Aid and just like a few things in the fridge. And she was telling me one day, like, I can't believe I went to this person's house. They got kids and they got almost nothing in the fridge. I couldn't believe it. I was so shocked, you know. And that's the same thing. Like, what happens to those families? You might know them. And if they're in need, you definitely need to bring them in because you have extra supplies and and perhaps you could teach them. And that's where they could learn the skills from you, helping them in an emergency situation. Now, would I bring somebody into my house that I don't know that is kind of rocked up to my door and like, hey, I need help? You know, for me, I'm going to say probably not. And you might go, well, David, that is so callous. Why would you not help somebody in the middle of a rainstorm that just come up to your house in the middle of the dark at midnight? Because the answer would be because they came to the middle of my house in the middle of the night and at midnight in the dark. And I don't know if there's other people out there with them. It's an ambush. I don't know them. How did they find my house 1,000 foot up a gravel driveway off a main road somewhere? It's a side tributary road anyway. Like, how would you even find this place? You need to be incredibly lost. Like, there's 100 other houses you could go to before you come up here. Like, if you're coming up to my door, I'm the last power pole on the entire system. I am the last water. There's a blow off water behind my, meter. That's it. I'm the last meter on the entire system. I mean, I am tucked hella away up here. And if you're coming to my door at midnight going, I need help, I'm like, you missed every other house that was down there. There's something very wrong that you're way up here asking for help. At that point, my spidey sense is tingling, going, oh, something very, very wrong. You're way up here. You're looking for a house that's way out of the way is what you're looking for. So you're going to have to suss some things out. But Ransom, what's the difference between you helping neighbors that aren't prepared and, trying to assess that threat that's coming at you as well? Because this hurricane, it's, it'll be a 3-day event and people will get through it. But, if it's a longer term thing, 2 weeks, power outage, EMP, natural disaster, volcanic eruption, some kind of massive New Madrid earthquake type of thing. I mean, how do you assess that then?
That's a good question. I don't think too many people really know, but I would think that if you realize things are off for more than 5 days, you need to be bugging out somewhere just in case. Like I said, being prepared and being wrong is cool. That's okay with me. I would rather feel silly being wrong than feel silly being right. So yeah, after 5 days, the odds are they're not going to fix anything or something's wrong. So you should probably be gone out of there. And plus, that's about the time that people start losing their minds. I'm not really worried about like the first 2 or 3 days because everybody, no matter what it is, would be confused for that period of time. Unless you know what it is. If somehow you knew what it was, that it's an EMP, then I would definitely be bugging out. And that would be pretty obvious, right? Because a lot of electronics just wouldn't work all of a sudden. You could put 2 and 2 together pretty fast. And if it's powerful enough to, it would have to be a X something like past 50 or something before it even came dangerous as far as starting fires. I don't know, what was the Carrington event? Because that was just basic copper wire there that heated up. So imagine today, everyone lives in little boxes with a bunch of that same kind of copper going through the entire house. So if it was, a surge in power to your house, you might just be in an inferno. So you would kind of know if it was these things. If it's a natural disaster, then odds are it's going to be over in a week or so, but you need to be prepared to make it because, kind of I was hinting before, not everybody does make it, unfortunately. Either they weren't prepared, they made bad decisions about where to go when. That's kind of like, as far as hurricanes, the main thing is that you're not going to be damaged by the environment itself. You can wait till the power comes back on if you have stuff, but actually trying to navigate, like people are trying to leave at the last minute when their area is going to be flooded. Those are boo-boos that cost people their lives. So if you're like anywhere where there's a storm surge or an overflowing river or a valley that can become a death trap, you need to think about those things and know about them. That's all I could kind of say about that. As people goes, though, I'm not really worried about that until things have completely hit the fan, and I don't think that's going to happen until there is no dollar. There's no dollar, so everybody will be in agreement that that's the end of our system, and that's when people will be freaking out. I don't think it'll be any natural disaster. Unfortunately, though, natural disasters can be big enough, and like we've seen in the past, ancient past and kind of near past, things can change at the drop of a dime, and something could come floating into our atmosphere that makes people go into survival mode whether they wanted to or not, including all the nations on Earth and the continuity of governments. And face it, you're small fries. You're a singular family or maybe a singular community, and you're not going to be competing with them. So you would have to just ignore what they're doing and find your own salvation. That's kind of my point was all night, is that governments can't and sometimes won't help you. So it's up to you to know what's going on and how to deal with it. All of those people that depend on government, I have a bad feeling that, in the next couple of years, and I'm not even talking about natural disasters, I'm just talking about the way it looks like the political environment is going. If you've been paying attention, there's so much lawfare going on right now that eventually some law enforcement and government entities are going to face off against others. And I think that's kind of the plan. And that's why they're talking about a mass casualty event. They're not talking about bolides coming in or super volcanoes or a combination of a bunch of volcanoes or global warming or global cooling or any of that stuff. They're worried that there's going to be some kind of political violence, and they're already preparing for restructuring our government according to their narrative. And I don't think that the people of our country would do that. However, if you get people that are power hungry and argue about who has the power, I could see there being interagency fighting, and it's already started as far as lawfare, where some groups are trying to prosecute the other groups and back and forth if they say the wrong thing or they go the wrong way against an agenda on one side or the other. And the next you'll see is some kind of, not that we haven't already, keep in mind, there's been actually, I think, 3 attempts on the ex-president, and they're acting like that's no big deal. That's no big deal. That's normal. Don't worry about it. Let's go to war with Ukraine. Let's go to total war with the entire Middle East, because if you're paying attention, that's what's happening there. They're expanding that war out just as predicted. It's going to, you're going to see on the news next, Jordan gets involved. And then over in the Ukraine-Russia thing, you're going to see Belarus, Romania, all these other countries start getting involved. It's kind of not looking good. So I hope that the political alignment goes into the more peaceful, stable way, but who knows if that's part of the TV show too.
I got an answer for you. The Carrington event was an X-45 flare. And if we were to see an X-45 flare, that would go right into the biblical prophecies of they are fighting in the Middle East, and everybody looks into the skies and sees something so tremendous that they all drop their weapons in unison and go home to their families, because that is far, far, far more important than fighting some ridiculous war for a piece of colored cloth that flies in the wind on an end of a stick. We used to fight for ways of life, but those things, as you can see, no longer mean anything. So what it means for me is cannon fodder, nothing more, nothing less than a depopulation event. It's taken a sort of a negative way to look at it, but in a realistic way as well. It's just another cycle in history. We look at one of the biggest lies ever sold to humanity was statism or nationalism. There is no statism. There is no nationalism. There is no countries. It is one human race on one planet. This fictitiousness that has been sold to us of these things called borders and passports and nationalities, that is a bigger lie put across all of humanity than central banking and the issuance of money and fiat currencies printed out of thin air. The largest lie ever told to humanity is that you are from a nation, and we buy it. We saber rattle from that border to the next border. That is the biggest lie ever told, is that we are from a country. And the way that they set up the world, if it would have been set up as you're born onto this planet, and I'm definitely not into this one world government thing, so don't mince my words here. That is the complete opposite of what I'm talking about. If it is you were born onto this planet and you understand the soul from another is also connected to the Creator, and I don't care where you exist on the planet, we are the same spark of divinity from the same Creator. That is entirely different than coming into one global unelected government to come down and push digital IDs and all these other things upon us, central bank digital currencies, to get you to oblige or die, literally. Those are completely different worlds. They don't even exist in the same dimensionality. But I digress. Thank you for listening tonight. If you enjoyed the content, please visit Civilization Cycle right over on Buy Me a Coffee. Buy Me a Coffee /Civilization Cycle. Buy us a double espresso so we can keep working late into the night like little chipmunk. We'll keep getting the show notes out to you. Also, go to civilizationcycle.com, and I will give you, and Ransom and I put together a one-page, probably 8 bullet points of things we talked about tonight. We do cover a lot of area and territory in our talks, so 8 points, 1 page, delivered to you on a weekly. That way you can start the conversation or just remember what we were talking about and then go down and do your own research. That's what I recommend completely. Don't believe a thing I said. I don't want you to believe me. I'm just saying what I'm saying, and it's up to you to take the information, take it, keep what works for you, and then discard the rest. What works for you, do the research on it, and go further. Because that's the whole thing about why would you deplatform somebody if you disagree with their opinion? You disagree with it, okay, I don't want to listen to it, I'll move on. It's the same thing. It's just freedom of thought, freedom of expression. CivilizationCycle.com and Buy Me a Coffee /Civilization Cycle. See you next week. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there and avoid the streams. Bye for good, bro. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.